Now I have the privilege of introducing today's keynote speaker. George Kinder is known as the father of life planning, and over the past 30 years he has revolutionized financial advice, having trained more than 3,000 professionals in 30 countries in the field of life planning, a method considered to be the gold standard for advisor-client relationship skills. He's been named one of the 35 most influential people in financial services and one of the top icons and innovators in the financial planning industry, and he's been inducted into the Financial Planning Magazine Hall of Fame. His expertise has been featured in Forbes, Time Magazine, FP Today, and the Journal of Financial Planning, Investment News, the New York Times, among others. In addition to his new book, A Golden Civilization, he has written 3 books on money: The 7 Stages of Money Maturity, Lighting the Torch, and Life Planning for You. He's here today to talk about life planning, mindfulness, and a golden civilization. Please join me in welcoming George Kinder.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Well, after hearing Jill, I feel that we're in a love fest here for NAPFA. So I'm going to tell you just briefly my earliest memory. You know, we do this exercise called Early Money Memories. Well, my earliest memory of NAPFA is I'm in my home office. That's all I have, and I feel I'm doing financial planning, and I don't know anybody who is not doing it for commissions. Not anybody. So I feel very alone. But that's how I do it. And I see this little squib in I don't know whether it was Time Magazine or Newsweek, could have been the Boston Globe. And it was talking about this organization that had less than 100 people in it and called the National Association of Personal Financial Advisors. And they modeled a fee-only approach. And I thought, wow. And I mean, I was so high throughout that day and very nervous about coming and meeting everybody. But it's been a very special organization. That was 35 years ago. A very special organization for all of those years, really a leader. And I have 2 other memories. One of them I'm cultivating right now in this moment. But my next really powerful experience at NAPFA, I mean, many friends and really great colleagues. But 18, 19 years later, they asked me to give a keynote. And it might have been the very first keynote I gave on the 7 stages of money maturity. So in a way, NAPFA was launching the life planning movement, which was obviously very, very meaningful for me. And so many of you have taken the basic 7 stages workshop. So I feel honored to be here for that reason. And now I feel special. It feels special again. It's like a half, you know, I was at halfway with the 7 stages, and now almost 20 years later, 18, 19 years later, I've been asked to talk on these 3 topics: life planning, mainly life planning, and a lot of the life planning that I want to talk about will happen in the breakout. I hope that many of you will be able to stay for it, because we've got a special panel of registered life planners who do it all the time. So they'll know more than I will in some ways. But also to talk about life planning. And you know, in the early days when we were doing 7 stages work, there was a lot of thought, and here at NAPFA as well, as you were beginning the counseling requirement that's changed to, I think, to communication and other things. And there was a lot of thought that the 7 stages was a psychology of money, which it is. And I think I was thinking of it that way as well. But as I saw people practice life planning coming out of the 7 stages, I realized that they weren't doing what it was that I'd imagined. And so I went back to the books, basically, and back to kind of thinking through what the process was. Because 7 stages doesn't have a process. And the process, that what I understand life planning as, is the delivery of freedom. It's a process that delivers freedom reliably into people's lives. And so that's what I'm more here to talk about today. And that process we call EVOKE. And again, I'll go into it in greater depth. But it's all based, I mean, we think of life planning in a way as either counseling or having these wonderful exercises inspiring people. I think the roots of life planning are in listening. So I was really thrilled to see all the workshops prior to the pre-conferences on listening. The roots of life planning are in listening. If you listen really well, you can do great life planning. And so I'm going to talk about those roots as well in mindfulness, because the roots of listening itself are in our inner listening, which is what I've often called mindfulness. And then I'm going to kind of explode everything and take life planning out into civilization, because I think that the implications, first of all, it's the work I've been working on for about 10 years, and now is finally arrived. But the implications of life planning, I'm going to be looking at that in terms of civilization, in terms of a golden civilization, but even more with the kind of the fraught nature of civilization in so many parts of the world. I think it's time to life plan civilization. So I'm going to talk about that as well. But first, what I'd like to do, let's see, where's the clicker? Is that up here? Yeah, here we go. What I'd like to do is to start this, give you an opportunity to listen. And what I'm going to be sharing are things that are very personal to me, things that I've created. And so in a way, I'm asking you to listen the way you might listen if you were meeting a client for the first time. So here we go. Let's see. Oh, wait. Where do I click? Do I have to point it in a particular direction?
No, they probably should.
Does it work? Great. Okay. Actually, that's the breakout session. So just to remind you that the learning objective here is about inner listening, the skills required for the mastery of all client listening skills, and the consequences of great listening for successful client engagement. So you'll hear many themes of that as we go through. And that's the breakout session coming up. And here's where we're going to begin. Thank you for your listening. So when we engage with a client, the client is revealing themselves from the first moments that they come in. They're revealing something about who they really are. And it requires a listening with all of our senses to be able to understand. And sometimes we don't like what we're experiencing. And listening, great listening, puts all of those judgments aside. And it's just fully present. So we're going to talk about how that works. We're really listening for their authenticity and for the little hints at what is keeping them from freedom and what can deliver them into freedom. So in this model that we use for life planning, it's called EVOKE, and just briefly what it is. So you've got the 5 phases: exploration, vision, obstacles, and knowledge, and execution. And each of them, it's an acronym, EVOKE, so EVOKE for each of those phases. In the E phase, the exploration phase, you will see that it is that listening is the main skill. It's the first skill that's represented. And I mean we really listen. When I say that, if you had a meeting that was an hour and a half to 2 hours long in your first meeting, 90% of the first hour and a half of that is the client talking, and at most 10% is you. So we do something really remarkable with that. And what's really, really funny and extraordinary about it is at the end of that meeting, it's not at all unusual for the client to come to you and say, that was the most wonderful conversation I've ever had. And, it wasn't a conversation because they talked the whole time. But what it is that they get to talk about who they are and what they care about. And we pretty much ask one question and then slight variations on the theme in that initial phase. And the question is, why are you here? One of the great things about a life planning practice is that it's primarily referral driven. The amount of referrals that you get in a life planning practice, there was a study by, I think, Price and Associates a number of years ago about this. The number of referrals is about 4 times as many as you get in a practice that is just basically driven by financial planning. And a financial planning practice gets many times the referrals that a wealth manager gets or an investment manager gets. So it's driven by referrals, so the people coming in, they're eager to talk. And they know that they're there to talk about what's important to them and that the money is meant to support that. So it's a beautiful kind of relationship that gets established right from the get-go. And what is astonishing is the degree of trust that you have after just one meeting. You begin to get referrals after one meeting. A number of registered life planners have been telling me. So it's just the other thing that I love about it in terms of our contemporary language and issues is that it's really demonstrating the fiduciary nature of the practice. I've often said that I don't know how you can be a fiduciary without being a life planner. So here we're giving the meeting. It's entirely the client's meeting. So if we go through let me just describe one other way. So normally, what are normal conversations? If you call them normal, but you're at a dinner party or you're at a cocktail party and you meet somebody and you notice something they're wearing and it reminds you of your trip to Italy. And so you start talking about it and they immediately interrupt you and say, well, I just came back from Italy. What a coincidence. Have you been to Montalcino? And then you interrupt, or you come in and you say, no, we didn't get to Montalcino, but we went to Siena, where my daughters really wanted to photograph. Oh, you've got daughters! And it goes back and forth, and then they want to know what kind of camera you use, and the conversation is just crackling with energy. Is that conversation going to be remembered as the best conversation of a lifetime? No, it's a wonderful conversation. But one of the things that happens, I think the mistakes that we may make in as we greet our clients is we want to engage in that kind of conversation because it's what we know. But every time we're revealing something about ourselves or asking questions, the client is beginning to filter how they want to respond to us. They're beginning to make assumptions about who we are. So they might not like children, they might not like Italy, they might not like wine, they might be bored by photography. All these things begin to be filters. Or if they do like them, they might think, well, these are areas that I want to talk about. But I came in with a secret sorrow, with some trouble with my family, and I don't know if this is the right person to share that with. So they're beginning to do that. So the skill in listening is really listening. And then listening with twin skills that we teach of empathy and of inspiration. The inspiration comes out in the vision meeting, of course, but we're always kind of there with it. I know many of you are familiar with Ed Jacobson, who works with us a lot, and the appreciation that really helps the client get excited. So we talk about how to use optimism and various ways of supporting the client's dreams in that first conversation. So another frame of this, let's see, where should I, okay. Another frame of this, another way of framing the EVOKE life planning process is looking at the kinds of experiences that are happening in the planner, the relationship, and the client. I'm not going to go through this chart in detail, but you'll see in the vision section that there's a lot of sensitivity. And the sensitivity really is because the astonishing thing about life planning is you're delivering the client into a dream of freedom that they hadn't quite fully verbalized, or they thought, I'll get to it in 2 years. And they've been telling themselves that for the last 15. I'll get to that in 2 years. And we're delivering it to them. So it brings this rush of excitement and thrill to them. But the sensitivity and the listening is required because there's a lot of shame in us not getting to it a long time ago, in us not really living to the full who we are and who we are meant to be. So obstacles, knowledge and execution are what you do already. It's the financial planning, and it's then the execution on the documents and that kind of thing. Although in life planning there's subtle differences. But in obstacles, well, life planning really explodes the client discovery process so that there are 3 phases to it of building trust, inspiring the vision. And what happens is that if there is tremendous energy, which there is in the vision that you unravel for the client, if there's tremendous energy, all the obstacles are dealt with bang, 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 bang. So the obstacles meeting is a dynamic meeting, and again, you don't solve the obstacles. I make a strong distinction between what we do and what a therapist does. The only thing that we do that overlaps, or 2 things really, and they're related, is that we empathize and we listen really well. But we're on a mission. We're on a mission to deliver that life. We're not going back into the past. We're not looking deeply at all of the obstacles. We're looking at how to get the vision accomplished, which is why it's such an energetic experience for the client as well as the advisor. It's really an experience of joy doing this. So let me go to the 3 questions. I know many of you are familiar with it. They're talked about in virtually every interview I've ever done. So you're all familiar with them. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But they're one of the sets of exercises that are used regularly in a life planning engagement. And this first one is just really about, you have all the money you need. What would you do? So it frees you up to dream. And you couldn't go to the second question, which is here. First, the second question is about only having 5 to 10 years left to live. So it narrows the perspective and gets us focused on things that are more meaningful. We're beginning to look at legacy questions here. And so it's much more touching, it's much more intimate. Clients need the first question to get to this question. This is too personal for some clients to go to right away. But then the third question is where most of the life plan for most clients, really comes out. And there are other exercises where you get other details of it. But in the question 3, this time what happens, the doctor shocks you with the news that you have only 1 day left to live. And then you notice what the feelings are, thinking about your expectations, what you had hoped for in your life. You ask yourself, what did I miss? Only 1 day left to live. I don't get to do all those things. What did I miss? Who did I not get to be? And what did I not get to do? And you can see that's an extraordinarily reflective, very serious, and very profound question. It's life and death. And the answers to that, not surprisingly, have almost never have anything to do with asset allocation. Or practically any other aspect of a financial plan. But what is there is what the client wants more than anything to experience, to clean up. And one of the things that we do, I mean, there's so many personal things that sometimes you wonder how can you put them into a life plan. Like, you know, you're 60 years old and the thing that you regret most is not having kids. What do you do with that? So there are things like that come out. And one of the things that we do is we explore each of those. How do you make it actually take them through a kind of hero's journey from that sorrow into something that's joyous around delivering something very, very close to what it was that they didn't get to accomplish. So I think you can see the richness of this. I also want to speak to the misuse of the 3 questions. A lot of times people stop, just basically learn some of the life planning skills. They don't do EVOKE, and they then take the 3 questions and they apply them to a lot of things. Like, let's do the 3 questions around your estate plan. Let's do the 3 questions around your business. You know, and that's all very good. But you can see the profundity of this. This is really life and death. This is where meaning is arrived at. And to address it in narrow context robs a lot of the power and a lot of the value of the 3rd question and its use. So what we do with this is we build something that we call a torch. That was the title of my 2nd book, Lighting the Torch. And I'm just going to share a little bit about this before we move to some of the deeper layers here. So the end of the vision meeting, at the end of the vision meeting, we've gone through all their goals and objectives. And as we go through it with excitement and with optimism and support. And then at the end, all this time, we're kind of crafting in our conversation, where there's a lot of listening, but also we are trying to get them to come forward more with what inspires them. And so as we're listening, we're putting together in our minds an image of what would really deliver freedom to them. And nowadays we're using kind of video clips in terms of the delivery. But the simplest way to describe it is that we take everything in the 3rd question and everything, if you know the Heart's Core grid that's also in all of my books, the Heart's Core grid, we take the Heart's Core column and we make sure that everything in those 2 exercises is in the torch. The 3rd question, not the 1st and 2nd. The Heart's Core column, not the fun to or ought to column. And then we sprinkle in a few other things. We've got exercises on what does an ideal day look like, so we'll sprinkle in a few things. We always give them something where they feel immediately there's a breath of fresh air, there's real joy that they hadn't imagined possible coming into their life. So there's always something that we put in there, preferably several things, that will change immediately. And then we put them on target to deliver the rest of this in a specific time frame. And you're going to be shocked at the time frame. We put a time, if you put 10 years, in 10 years you're going to have this. Well, yeah, that's great. You know, I'm kind of aiming for that, right? There's no energy. But if they're expecting it in 10 years and you say, if as a consequence of our work together, I or we were to deliver this to you within a year and a half, and then you put the things in, how would that be? So what happens when you do something like that? When you shorten the time frame like that? You get enormous anxiety, and excitement. And what you want to do in the torch is have both of those feelings kind of evenly matched. If you have them evenly matched, you've got a powerful energy in the client to actually make it happen, to overcome the anxiety and deliver their dreams. So we put a specific time frame in, and we make it a delivery. If as a consequence of our work together, I or we were to deliver this to you within anywhere from 1 month to 3 years are the time frames we use. The result for the client should be one of incredible excitement. I mean, if your client doesn't seem like they're soaring with freedom from meeting to meeting, I'm not sure you're doing life planning. I'm not sure you're doing life planning. There should be, particularly in this meeting, there could be a shaking with excitement. Could be a movement to tears. There could be blushing. There's clearly a sense of energy and or feeling profoundly moved. So this is the richness of doing life planning, is you are delivering something that they didn't think was possible and suddenly they realize it is. So what is necessary in life planning is that the dream have that kind of energy for the client. If it doesn't, there's no way you're going to solve the obstacles. They're going to stay stuck wherever they were. It needs that energy. And then the obstacle session is also a dream. It goes very rapidly. They're eager to solve the problems. Often they come in the next meeting and the problems are already solved, or an awful lot of them are. So you need that energy, otherwise you end up doing therapy, which is a slog. And it can be deep and meaningful, but it's not driving toward freedom. And that's not to say it isn't worthwhile. I think the skills of therapy and what it adds to our work are fantastic. So what this points out to me is that our notion of risk in financial planning is skewed in a kind of almost an absurd direction. We think that risk has everything to do with numbers and with money. So let me just share with you this question. What is the greatest risk to a client? And at first we think, 1929 size market crash, right? I mean, that would be devastating. Okay, and then in the 70s and 80s, we learned that having a financial plan would have solved a lot of that. So just having a financial plan, and that and a lot more. So having a financial plan in place, not in place, would be the greatest risk, right? I don't think so. I think the greatest risk is showing up here as the client not living into their dream. They don't realize that when they come in to see you. But in a life planner's office, that becomes palpable. And that's the energy that we come out of. So it's why lighting the torch and life planning are so powerful. The client is taken by surprise in this work. It's quite astonishing. And what is revealed is that the meaning of money is the meaning of life. So we're really putting together, again, back to that fiduciary obligation to put the client first. This does it. This does it, palpably does it. So what are the dreams are pretty simple. These are the 5 things that come up more than anything. So it's not complex. It's not like owning Maui or something. It's the first one, the one that comes up more than any other. Not always, but almost always, is family and relationship. The second one that's most common is actually our values. It gives me, these first 2, really, all of them, give me great heart about civilization. If we can all get together on these things, how wonderful that would be. So the second one is about values and spirit. And it could be just, if they're of a secular mind, it could be just values. If they're of a spiritual or religious mind, it could be explicitly religious. And that's the second most common pursuit that's listed in the third question. The third most common is creativity. That really surprised me. But it's creativity not only in a cultural way, it's also creativity around business, wanting to set up your own business, kind of an entrepreneurial energy. And one of the things I would say about life planning is life planning delivers more entrepreneurial energy into the world than anything I know. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So community, that we're taught that. We're taught that in our CFP curriculum. But it's just in estate planning. You know, this is about their lives. And the final one, environment or place, this one surprised me. People live in the city and they want to spend more time in the country, or vice versa. And then the planet Earth comes up as something that they want to be connected with or protect. We're going to talk more about life planning, as I said, in the breakout session, which is going to be mostly dedicated to it, and you'll have people who are actually practicing it, and you'll have plenty of time to ask questions, which we welcome. It's really going to be your questions that are going to be driving that process. So I look forward to that. But what I'd like to do now is to go to the deeper level. I mentioned that listening is the essence of great life planning. So what is the essence of great listening? Well, it's listening inside yourself. How do you listen? Do you listen at all, or do you just think? So we're going to look at what that listening looks like, and then we're going to talk about civilization some. So in order to get there, I want to ask you a question, because here we're talking about freedom, clearly, for people, what freedom means to them. If looking back over your life, I want to do this as a question so you can raise your hand. Have you ever experienced, walking the beach, making love, creating your business, creating something else? Have you ever experienced hanging out with your kids? Have you ever experienced a moment of freedom in the past? How many of you? I want to see. How many of you? Only that many? Come on, some of you. I don't have a big smile over here. So we all will say yes to that. And it's a trick question. You all got it wrong. Okay? It's a trick question. We have never experienced freedom in the past. Never. Never. We have only experienced freedom in the present moment. And this is a pretty extraordinary thing. Because if you begin to think that and explore it and what that means, it means that our map of time and space is all wrong. Those ovals with, all the, and you go this way for the past and that way for the future. And the present moment is this tiny little thing in that map. That's not our experience. Our experience is the present moment is everything. And much larger than the past and the future. So I'm going to explore that for a moment. I know that's a large concept, but I'm going to explore that. In fact, let's go to it right now and see what that means. It means a lot about listening. We don't listen in the past and we don't listen in the future. We listen in the present moment. So freedom is only in the present moment. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see something that I call map of mindfulness. And you'll see that I've created something new here. I now have kind of a world, a universe, where space and time isn't the center. It's the present moment. So I've been trying to figure out how do we conceptualize this so that it works. And this is a pretty extraordinary graphic. It ostensibly, and this is how we're going to start with this graphic, it talks about how mindfulness works. It's also talking about listening and how energy gets created, entrepreneurial energy in our clients. It's talking about life planning as well. Let's talk for a moment. How many of you have done mindfulness, meditate? Again, I want to serious so I know what I'm dealing with here. Have done some kind of contemplative practice at some point? Only a handful? All right, so I can't tell, but it looks like at least half, maybe 2/3 of you have done something. So that's good. That will help me because you'll know some answers to some of these questions. So mindfulness is big right now. You see it everywhere in the news. And you see that it reduces your stress. True. It increases your longevity. I don't know yet, but I'm older than a lot of you. It increases your health, your flexibility, your concentration, your focus, all of these things. And there are thousands of studies now that actually demonstrate that, each of those things. And those are good reasons to practice. I think people usually start because they want to reduce stress, which is fine. I'm going to go at it in a different way. I'm going to look here at how it actually works in relation to space and time, and in relation to peace or great spirit, in relation to the present moment. So when you sit down to meditate, to do inner listening, as I call it, most people try it out in the morning. And so they're starting to sit there and be quiet, and then they remember something that they forgot in their emails, and they rush over here, or at least in their mind they do, and they feel so pulled they begin to get anxious. They hear a ping in their pocket that says that they're getting a text message, and now they remember that they didn't finish the work yesterday they were supposed to deliver in the morning. Okay. And then other random thoughts come up about, picking the kids up at school and making sure that the shopping's done and all of that. So all these things are coming up. And whenever they come up, you go right back to the present moment, which is usually the breath. Not always, but usually the focus is the breath. And what happens is you get kind of frustrated with all these things that you got to do. And some of you who've only tried it once, and I'll bet you there's a number of you who've done this. So if you've only done it once, you go, it doesn't work, right? And so you get up and you go to work. And if you're unlucky, you never do it again. But if you stayed with it, maybe that particular experience wasn't going to work. Most of them will if you keep at it. And what happens is quite extraordinary. So you're sitting there and you've got all these thoughts going on, and you're thinking this isn't working, and then you notice there's this calm, there's this quiet, there's this peace. And the peace, the thoughts are still there, but the peace is surrounding it. There's this spaciousness around all those thoughts. And you go, wow, I guess this is working. I'm not getting that depth that I thought I'd get. I'm not getting enlightened or something like that, but it's really peaceful. It's kind of nice. What's happening there is very simple, actually. It's not magical at all. It has to do with a cognitive habit. That when we first sat down, our cognitive habit, and we do this all day and all of our lives, our cognitive habit is to think about ourselves as the center of the universe, and time and space feeding us with information and things to do. That's our cognitive habit. And what happens when you do inner listening is you are attempting moment by moment to shift that habit to just being here, just being with the present moment. And as I mentioned, the present moment is where it all happens. So there's something extraordinary. I call it selflessness when that spaciousness comes in, because there's less of I, me, and mine in what's compelling. And you feel this peace. So you've seen I put selflessness up there, and what happens then at that moment is you drop all the way down to this bottom oval, which I'm calling peace or great spirit. Did I talk about the secular and religious? Yeah, so some people are strictly secular, so peace works for them, and some people are more religiously or spiritually inclined, and great spirit works for them. But anyway, there's something quite wonderful down there that occurs. And so, this present moment gives us something else. Have you ever tried to stay in the present moment? I'll tell you something. It's like looking at the sun. You can't do it. The sun might blind you, but the present moment is much more of a challenge, because it will not stay. It keeps throwing you back into time and space again. That's what all those thoughts were. Present moment's the most powerful thing in the universe. There's no energy like it. And so one of the things that happens as a consequence of mindfulness practice, dedicated practice, is that not only do you get more of the peace, but you also get more energy because you keep trying to master the present moment. And if you become more awake, it becomes more like a mirror of awakening that's bouncing you back. When you first start, it's the mirror of forgetfulness that keeps taking you back. So a couple more things here, and then we'll move on. I think all my books have been about freedom. I've written a book on mindfulness. I've written a book of poetry and photography. All of my books have been about freedom, 3 on money. And I'm really interested in what it is and how do you maximize it. Not only inside yourself through life planning and that kind of thing and mindfulness, but how you maximize it throughout civilization. So there's a wonderful set of studies that have been done about happiness as well. And I know you're all familiar with that, and you've had speakers up here who've talked to you about it and all. The one that I think is the most seminal study about happiness was done by Daniel Gilbert, who's now the most popular professor at Harvard and has the most popular course on happiness, and a guy named Matthew Killingsworth. And in that study, what they did was they went to 80 countries, maybe more, at least 80 countries, and they handed people that were volunteering, they handed them a phone and an app. And that app pinged them, boom, 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 3 times or more randomly throughout their day. And every time they got pinged, they had to immediately go to the smartphone and enter in 3 things. What are you doing? Are you happy or unhappy? And are you focused or are you distracted? Really interesting. Turns out that there's virtually no correlation between happiness and sitting on a beach as opposed to taking the garbage out. Virtually no correlation at all. The correlation is between, are you present? Are you in the present moment? Are you present? Or are you distracted? It's extraordinary. The title of the study is A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind. To me, it's not so much about happiness as it's about freedom. Freedom to me, I mean, there are many aspects of freedom. We're obsessed right now with democratic freedoms, and we should be, and market freedoms, which we should be. And there's also the freedoms that life planning delivers. But the most wonderful thing is this experience of freedom that we have as we walk through our days. And how do we maximize that? How can we maximize that? Is a very interesting topic, interweaving life planning with civilization. There's one other work that I'll bring to your awareness. The great author, psychologist, Daniel Goleman, who introduced to us the notion and the book of emotional intelligence, wrote a year ago a book where he took all these studies of mindfulness and showed how, through dedicated practice, we actually accumulate. You see, I've got this term down there, gathering virtue. We accumulate virtue, that the practices are cumulative. And one of the things that I've been wrestling with in civilization, in my thoughts about civilization, is this lack of virtue. In particular, we send a Cassini satellite up to Saturn, right, to look at the rings. And they talk at NASA about the integrity of their systems, right? When we think of that, the integrity of our systems. Well, isn't the planet Earth, isn't civilization itself, isn't democracy a far more complex system than a satellite, which essentially is a weapon going up to Saturn's rings? Shouldn't we have far higher standards of integrity for civilization, for economics, for democracy? If we're going to survive, to be sustainable? I mean, we would never have a lack of integrity in our system sending a satellite to Saturn. So this is something that, one of the reasons I'm very proud to be a member of NAPFA, is it's something we've stood for, is that integrity in financial services. And as much as we're proud of it, and we can look at statistics saying we're getting somewhere and everything, there's so many ways that the public just doesn't get it. And that means that it's still an uphill battle in many ways. And if you look at surveys of trust, you find that financial advisors are down there. Maybe they're not quite as low as a politician, but they're pretty darn low. And reporters are only just a little bit above them. So here we are. We've got a civilization, a democracy. And the essence of our democracy, our participation, our voting, our delivering people into office, those people are disrespected. They aren't trusted. And we all know why, and I'm not going to go into that. Same thing about financial advisors. What happens to a civilization where their systems, their economic systems, their governmental and democracy systems, and their systems of information are not trusted? That's kind of what we're looking at now. It's dangerous. And I was very, personally, I was distraught, starting with the banking crisis. These last 10 years have been difficult for me because I've been looking at what's going wrong in order to try to figure out what to do that might go right. So how can we fix that was really a lot of my passion in this recent time. And my thought was that what we really need to do is figure out a way to life plan civilization. It's time to do it. And what we do, as you can tell in a life planning engagement, is we find the dream of freedom, and within short order, the client is living it. It's time to do that with civilization. There's too many negative externalities out there of the systems that we've set up. There's ongoing wars. I mean, you can read Steven Pinker's book, and it's wonderful to remind us of all the great things that have happened. But there's a lot of darkness that's still out there, and a lot of threats to the earth, threats to democracy, threats of inequality, lots of things. And my thought is that we can solve those. My thought has been that perhaps it's the underpinnings. Perhaps there's something about our foundational thinking that is just a little bit off, because it's delivered a lot of good things. How do we not suffer the consequences of the negative externalities? So I've created this book. You can now pre-order it on Amazon, called A Golden Civilization. But what we're really engaged in now in the community of I'm engaged in, and a certain segment of the life planning community is engaged in, is creating conversations in your communities, creating conversations that actually life plan, that bring people together, and figuring out how to have a conversation that's not polarized, that's not on one side, and that works from the vision. Because the truth is, we're all human beings, and we all want the same golden civilization. It's very, very similar. When you get down and you bring a group of Republicans and a group of Democrats together, you'll find that the actual vision, the idealistic vision of society, is very similar. So how do we... So part of what we're doing is a conversation, and then I've written this resource. And here's the thought. Imagine 1,000 generations from now, humanity has arrived at a golden civilization. What does it feel like? Paint the picture, live into the dream, and that's the V of vision. And then identify all the structures and systems that got us there. And look at the ones, and if we have them right now, then keep them. And if we don't have them right now, then implement them. And look back from that vantage to today at all the structures and systems that absolutely won't take us to a golden civilization, and throw them out. So that's the idea. That's what we do in a life plan. And it all works because of the vision, because there's a shared vision. We think we've got these strange notions of time. It's only been 250 years since both Adam Smith and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. We're still, if people are looking back 1,000 generations from now, they'd look back and think this was all part of the Industrial Revolution. Well, maybe some of the foundations need to be looked at. And I'm going to share some of my thoughts. But my hope in creating conversations is that my thoughts won't be the predominant answer. I'm doing my best as a resource. I think it comes out of all of us, which is why we're making this attempt to create conversations. So let's just see what else to say here before I go on. So what I've done, and I'm just going to share a few more slides, and then we'll get on to the next set of programs. So you can see what I've done. The subtitle of my book is a map of mindfulness. So you can see that I've taken the map of mindfulness and have many different variations of it. And here it shows how transparency, we think of transparency as something that's happening just up in the grid, the economic grid. And we know how valuable it is and how important it is. And what I'm arguing here is there's also transparency that goes inside of us. And we want both those transparencies to be flourishing. And that's what really brings freedom and integrity into a set of systems and a set of structures. So one of the things that I've been exploring is what happens when we shift the map, as you can see. And I think there's a lot of positive things that happen, including the ability to gather virtue at the base. I'm going to go right to some of my thinking. So one of the things that I think is that far greater than fiscal or monetary policy, the most efficient driver of economic growth in society is life planning. And it dramatically increases entrepreneurial spirit throughout society, and thus the innovation that makes economies hum. You know, what we've done with entrepreneurial spirit is we've squirreled it away and it's up there. We think of entrepreneurial energy as happening only with venture capital and private equity machines, factories and banks and all of that. I mean, we know the difference because most of us are entrepreneurial in our business. And my argument is that if we democratize entrepreneurial energy, that the innovation will be factors larger, much greater. We think we're in an innovative economy. I don't think so. I think the innovation is very small compared to what it could be by democratizing entrepreneurial energy. So I'm going to just take primarily just one more slide and go through a few more of these principles. Let's see. Yeah, we'll do this one. Just to make sure I cover everything. So I have, in doing this thinking, in working and trying to think through what might shift, that might change, that might eliminate the negative externalities and also bring this rush of freedom into society, one of the things I've realized is that it's moments of freedom that we should be economizing and aiming at, not transactions. So right now we aim at transactions. We've got a transaction-based economy. But if we aimed at freedom instead, and we've talked about already, they're articulating moments of freedom and all of that. If we aimed at freedom, I mean, right now, because of how we're aiming, we have these crude measures, which are numbers and money. And because of that, you know, we tend to think of freedom as having to do with money primarily. But if we really aim at maximizing the efficient allocation of freedom, meaning maximizing freedom throughout society and for 1,000 generations, what a difference that would make. And I think that one of the things that you can see pretty quickly is that it would dramatically reduce the problem of inequality if our focus were actually on individual freedom. It maximizes the efficient allocation of human capital, of resources, because of human resources, rather than of industrial, institutional resources, rather than of jobs or of money. It maximizes our capital, human beings, which is fantastic. And again, we go then to democratizing innovation, maximizing innovation, democratizing entrepreneurial spirit. I see entrepreneurial spirit, if you life plan, if everybody is life planned, that entrepreneurial spirit is just rushing into society, thriving, celebration of entrepreneurial energy. One other aspect of this is that the innovation begins to happen everywhere. So it happens at home with our children. It happens in our backyards. It happens in our communities. It happens in the larger family context. And the communities become entrepreneurial in figuring things out. We don't depend on either large corporations or large government. It tends to be driven from the grassroots, which is quite wonderful. One of the other salient benefits is that we, you think about this 250 years and you go, wow, what we have done. Again, look at Steven Pinker's work and how he's managed it. And what we see is all the great benefits that have come from our brains, okay, the great structures of civilization. Where are our great hearts? What are the developments that have happened with our great heart, period? And where's virtue? Has virtue increased during that time? Maybe, but is that where we primarily think? So through this kind of energy, we have the opportunity to bring great virtue and great hearts into the forums of innovation. One of the things that I talk about a lot is the embedding virtue throughout institutional life. It's a major issue in our relationship with institutions right now, because what we're crying out for, and it's absurd. It was there in the Investment Act of 1940. Why is it that we have to, be arguing about the fiduciary responsibility? So one of the things that it strikes me in terms of negative externalities is that if every institution in the world had a significant fiduciary responsibility, that a lot of the externalities would just disappear. So, and one of the ways to do that societally is to rethink the self-interest that Adam Smith started us off with so brilliantly, and it's delivered so much, and I love it. So I don't want you to think that I'm against self-interest. I think it's a fabulous economic principle. But what happens if a large corporation has their self-interest and you're this little person over here and you're arguing over self-interest? Who's going to win? Whether it's an institution of government, an institution of corporation, or an institution of nonprofits, who's going to win? It's not what Adam Smith imagined. He imagined small shopkeepers. He imagined us, individuals. And that's where the great benefit of self-interest lies. It's not in one large institution's self-interest or a bunch of self-interested institutions running society. So I think that it's just a small shift, really, in education and training that can shift from a self-interest-based economy to one that is based on self-knowledge, based on freedom. And where self-interest is still there, a very important element helps us define price and quantity, supply and demand. And out of this kind of shift, what I see is figures of wisdom running the large institutions, not what we see more often, which is figures that seem to be figures of arrogance. I see great heart everywhere. I see the whole institutional ethos moving toward fiduciary, and where free markets are not dominated markets by large institutions, but are genuinely free. In life planning, using the skills of life planning, I think we can do this. Which is why we're creating these series of conversations to begin to make that happen. So I think it's time we life plan civilization. That's my message. Thank you. Thank you.